Welcome back. Derek Percy is thought to be responsible for as many as 9 murders, all of them children, although he was only ever convicted of one, and a coroner's inquiry later found him guilty of a second. He died of lung cancer on July 23, 2013, still insisting that he could not remember if he had been responsible for any of the others, denying their families any closure for the rest of their lives. However, it was later revealed that Percy was at the same locations of all 9 abductions and murders, and that a stash of sickening, sadistic, handwritten and hand-drawn notes and pictures discovered 20 years later bore a striking similarity to the methods used in the murders. Derek Percy had the hallmarks of a serial killer from an early age. He started stealing and wearing women's clothing and developed a fetish for slashed or cut underwear and for knives. Born in the inner western Sydney suburb of Strathfield in 1948, he was the eldest of 3 sons of railway electrician Ernest Percy and his wife Elaine. Trouble with Derek started in the early 1960s when the intelligent but shy boy began engaging in odd behaviour. His father had taken the family to picturesque Mount Beauty in 1961 for his new job at the hydroelectric plant in Victoria. When women's underwear began disappearing from clotheslines in the town, the rumour was that teenage Derek was snowdropping, as was the term for theft of that nature. 2 of Derek Percy's fellow students from Mount Beauty High School found him at a local swimming hole wearing a woman's negligee and underpants. When Percy's family moved to the tiny Snowy Mountains town of Cancoban in New South Wales for his father's new job, Derek stayed behind at Mount Beauty to finish his exams. He stayed at the family home of his only school friend, Ken Hosking, who lived next door to the Casarotto family. The Casarottos noticed their daughter's clothing had begun to vanish from the clothesline. Weeks later, a dumped suitcase was found with the clothing slashed and newspaper cutouts of women in underwear with the faces, breasts and genitalia cut out. It was around this time that Percy began keeping his first diary, with graphic descriptions of his torture and rape fantasies. In 1966, Percy joined his family in Cancoban, and it was there that he lured 2 girls, aged 5 and 6, to a caravan on the Percy property. He managed to entice the children to show him their genitalia. When they reported it to their parents, they confronted the Percys. Ernest Percy dismissed the incident and told Derek to go and see the local doctor. Whether a criminal charge or psychiatric counselling could have changed 17-year-old Derek Percy's course and saved lives is debatable, because if the detectives were right about Percy, the killing had already begun. On July 27, 1969, 12-year-old Yvonne Touhy and her friend 11-year-old Shane Spiller were enjoying a holiday in the small town of Warneet on Western Port Bay in Victoria. The friends were walking down a dirt track on their way to Ski Beach to make a fire of driftwood and to have a picnic, unaware that someone was watching them. Suddenly a man appeared and grabbed Yvonne, holding a red dagger to her throat. He tried to beckon Shane to come with them, but the boy pulled a tomahawk from his belt that he brought to cut the driftwood. The man threatened to cut Yvonne if Shane came any closer. Shane decided to get help and ran through scrub to the road, where he saw the man's car drive past with Yvonne under a blanket. Shane managed to flag down a passing car and was taken to the police station. Yvonne's family were notified. When interviewed by police, Shane was able to identify the make and colour of the car, an orange station wagon with a sticker on the rear window. He even drew a picture of the sticker, which had a Royal Navy emblem. Other witnesses in the area came forward with information about an orange car with New South Wales number plates that had been seen driving erratically along a dirt road. A search of the area failed to locate the car, and police were well aware that every minute that passed was crucial in finding Yvonne. Because of the naval sticker Shane had drawn, police decided to visit the Cerberus Navy base, 35 kilometres south of Woorneet. With the aid of naval police, officers were quickly able to find the car that had been described. The owner was Derek Ernest Percy, a 20-year-old electrical fitter naval trainee. When officers went to Percy's barracks, his barrack mates told them that Percy was doing laundry. They got to the laundry facility just in time to stop him from cleaning blood-soaked clothes. For the first time in what detectives believe was his long murder spree, the pedophile sadist had been caught red-handed. Percy was apprehended and questioned. While denying any knowledge of the murder, he admitted that he had been on Ski Beach. By now, Yvonne had been missing for over 5 hours, and the blood on the clothes were a distressing sign to police. Percy's car was searched and a blood-stained knife was found. After hours of skillful interrogation, Percy finally mumbled, "Yes, I did kill her, and I can take you to her." By this time, Yvonne's family had been anxiously waiting for almost 10 hours for news of their daughter. Percy took police to Fisheries Road, Devon Meadows, 8 kilometres from where he had abducted Yvonne. Her body was found under bushes. Her wrists were tied behind her, her mouth stuffed with balled-up cloth. Percy had strangled her and mutilated her body. Her throat was cut and she had been disemboweled. Percy, whose demeanour had been very matter-of-fact during the horrifying discovery, was arrested and charged. But there were actually 2 victims of Percy's action that day. 11-year-old Shane Spiller was forced to identify Percy in a lineup. Newspapers featured photos of him holding his tomahawk. If he was feted as a hero, he didn't feel like one. By the age of 14, Shane began drinking and drifted away from school and his family. He developed serious drug and alcohol addictions and was never properly treated for a severe case of post-traumatic stress disorder. Shane ended up in the New South Wales coast town of Wyndham, where he slept with a baseball bat and cut a trap door under his living room floor to hide. He would ask friends to jot down the registration numbers of cars in his street. There was an overwhelming dark cloud over his life, and he was basically self-medicating with the drugs and alcohol. On September 9, 2002, Shane was last seen leaving his 2-room shack for the local store to collect his mail. He has not been seen alive since, nor have his remains ever been found. The day after Percy's arrest, one of his former school friends, Ron Anderson, is summoned by the homicide squad. Anderson and Percy lost touch after leaving school, with Anderson joining the Victoria Police in December 1968, a year after Percy joined the Navy. But it is hoped that he might be able to elicit information from his old school friend to find out what makes him tick. A 19-year-old probationary constable and still a fresh-faced country boy, Anderson remembers Percy as likeable and quiet. His immediate reaction is to find out what he can do to help, assuming it was Percy who had asked to see him. Then he sees the morgue photographs of Yvonne. Anderson feels sick to his stomach. He is taken to the city watch house opposite the Russell Street headquarters and walks straight to Percy's cell. The following conversation between Anderson and Derek is taken from an extract from the book Lambs to the Slaughter by Debbie Marshall. Anderson holds his constable's hat in his hand, containing his police notebook. Percy is sitting on the cell cot, sobbing and distraught. He looks up as Anderson enters and says, "Hello, Ron. Looks like I've effed up this time." Anderson wonders what he means by this time. He remains standing, registering nothing on his face, and answers, "It certainly looks like it, Derek." Percy is openly crying, his hands clammy with fear. "What am I going to do, Ron?" His voice is quiet and low, choked with tears. Anderson suggests he see a doctor or psychiatrist, adding they may consider you were sick at the time. "Would that help, Ron?" Percy asks. Anderson has not been briefed to ask Percy about other unsolved crimes, but he does so anyway. "Were there any others, mate?" Percy howls, cradling his face in his hands, sounding like a wounded animal caught in a trap. "I cannot remember." The others that Anderson is wondering about include names that have made front-page headlines around Australia since 1965. Children who have either disappeared into thin air or whose bodies have been found and their killers never brought to justice. The stabbing murders of 15-year-old Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock at Wanda Beach in Sydney in January 1965. The abduction of the 3 Beaumont siblings, Jane 9, Ernest 7 and Grant 4, from Glenelg Beach in Adelaide in January 1966. The strangling murder of 6-year-old Alan Redston in Canberra in September 1966. The mutilation murder of 3-year-old Simon Brook in Sydney in May 1968. The abduction of 7-year-old Linda Stillwell from St Kilda in Melbourne in August 1968. Anderson fingers the brim of his hat and stares at Percy. "If you can remember, it's better to say now than after you are released and have to serve even more time. It would also assist in deciding your mental health." Percy answers, "I know, I just can't remember." Anderson plugs on. "Well, look, Derek, I'll ask you about some of the ones that I know about. You don't have to say anything. If you remember, I will jot it down and it could be used in court. I will try and get it heard all at the same time." Percy nods, staring at Anderson with bleary eyes. Anderson draws his notebook out of the hat and takes up a pen. "What about Linda Stillwell? She went missing at St Kilda." "Yes, I drove through St Kilda that day," Percy blurts. "I had been at Cerberus in the afternoon and was driving along the esplanade on the way to the White Ensign Club for some drinks." Anderson's mind is racing. "Did you kill Linda Stillwell?" Percy says, "Possibly, but I don't remember a thing about it." Anderson draws a breath. "What about Simon Brook in Sydney?" Percy nods recognition. "I was driving my brother Lachlan to work that day. We turned off the railway cutting where he was found. I came back home that way." Anderson asked, "So you drove past the same spot in Sydney on the day that Simon Brook was killed?" And Percy answers, "Yes." Anderson's heart is beating faster than he would like, and he hopes Percy can't tell. Do you remember if you killed Simon? I wish I could, Percy mumbles, staring again at the floor. I might have, I don't remember. Police training has taught Anderson to stay calm, to return to ask questions in another way. He now turns to the biggest mystery in Australian criminal history, the abduction of the Beaumonts, the missing children who haunt the nation, the children who never came home. What do you know about the Beaumont children in South Australia? I was in Adelaide at the time, Percy answers. Anderson can no longer hide his shock, reeling at Percy's admission. You remember being in Adelaide when they went missing. Where were you when they disappeared? Near the beach, Percy says. Anderson wants to elicit details about these children, but the ruddy-faced watch-house keeper is throwing his weight around, interrupting Anderson with a curt warning that he has no business being in Percy's cell and that he needs to go. Anderson tries to stand his ground, to explain that he is on homicide squad business, but the keeper stands sour-faced in the cell doorway, arms crossed, adamant he must leave. Later, the detectives confirm his authority to talk to Percy, but when he returns to the cell, the momentum is gone. The conversation between the former old friends is now stilted, awkward, as if a curtain had come down. Anderson tries hard to return to the subject. Just tell me one thing, Derek. Did you kill the Beaumont children? Still, Percy stares at the floor. I could have, he answered, but I don't remember a single thing. But you admit that you remember being at 3 separate locations at the times and days that children were killed. Percy replies, yes, but I cannot remember what happened. There is no more to say. Look, Derek, if you do remember anything further, give me a call. I think it is in your best interests. Yes, Ron, I understand, Percy says bleakly. I just wish I could remember. Anderson walks out of the cell, shaken and stunned. He says to Bill Hutton and Kim White, 2 former school acquaintances, also waiting to speak to detectives about Percy, I think they will hang the bastard. But unbelievably, no official statement is taken after Anderson's interview, and no audio recording equipment is used. All that is noted of the exchange is a hurried scribble in the notebook that Anderson has in his police hat, tossed in amongst the reams of other material on the Touhy case. Documentation reporting the original interview records and running sheets of Percy are kept, but there is no record at all of Anderson's conversation with Percy. His recommendation to detectives that they speak with Hutton and White about Percy's behaviour at school is also dismissed out of hand. No one thinks it necessary either to do anything formal with the notes Anderson has taken, outlining the most difficult 30 minutes of his life. In 1970, Percy was convicted of the murder of Yvonne Touhy and found not guilty by reason of insanity. A juror would later reveal that they found themselves with 2 choices. If Percy was deemed to be sane, he could serve 15 years for the murder. If found insane, he could be indefinitely detained at the governor's pleasure. Deciding they did not want to see Percy released back into society at the relatively young age of 35, the jury opted for the insanity plea. No minimum tariff was set on Percy's detention. Psychiatrists would later find him to be completely sane. It would be another 20 years before his name would return to haunt the people of Australia, when a young policeman is given the job of reviewing an old inquest, the cold missing persons case of Linda Stillwell. He was assured the assignment would take a couple of weeks, a month at the outside. Instead, it took 11 years. As Wayne Newman and his colleagues meticulously traced backwards, they found alarming factors that could make Derek Percy a prime suspect. Percy was on leave from the Navy and in the area at the time of Linda's disappearance. He committed the chilling murder of Yvonne Touhy only 18 months later. Eyewitnesses who say they saw a young girl fitting Linda's description with a man, the description of the man fit Percy to a T. Detectives began to match Percy's travels with his parents on seaside caravan holidays and sailing regattas with unsolved crimes. The result was a child murder map. Old police identikit images of a man with a long, lean face linked to a number of the crimes were also strikingly similar to Percy. But it was the discovery of a hidden cache of vile clippings, files and perverted handwritten diaries that shocked and sickened Victoria Police. Somehow, while incarcerated for the mutilation and murder of Yvonne Touhy, Derek Percy managed to secretly amass materials that filled 35 tea chests and included fantasies about the rape, torture and murder of children, and somehow had them moved from the prison to a Melbourne self-storage unit he rented. For 20 years, the material had lay undiscovered. Slowly, Senior Sergeant Detective Wayne Newman began to match the writings with some of Australia's unsolved child murders. Piecing together 6 stories with map references, they paired unsolved murders with locations Percy admitted being in. They were the shocking desires of one of the nation's worst sexual sadists, going back decades. More importantly, there were maps found which had lines drawn through the street where Simon Brooks was abducted, as well as old-style razor blades. Razor blades were the weapon used to mutilate little Simon's body. There was a map of where the bodies of 15-year-olds Christine Sharrock and Marianne Schmidt were found, along with a lewd lesbian cartoon that Percy had written Wanda across. A street directory had a line drawn through the St Kilda pier where 7-year-old Linda Stillwell had been abducted. How the items were smuggled out of the prison remain unknown, but Percy had received a Navy pension since his arrest, had nearly $200,000 in a bank, and had successfully invested in gold. He used part of his income to rent the South Melbourne storage unit. Among the items seized by police was an extensive stamp collection valued at several $1,000s, compiled while Percy was in prison. In 2005, the New South Wales coroner, John Abernethy, held an inquest into the murder of Simon Brook. Percy refused to give evidence on the grounds of self-incrimination. Abernethy referred the case to the New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions to see if there was sufficient evidence to charge Percy, but the DPP decided not to proceed. One of the problems with investigating Percy was that police did not have a sample of his DNA. Police in Victoria can, by law, take DNA samples from anyone convicted of a crime. But Percy was never actually convicted, having been found not guilty by reason of insanity. This legal loophole meant that police could not take his DNA. In at least one of the murders for which Percy is a suspect, it is believed that DNA from the crime scene has been preserved. In 2002, a parliamentary law reform committee in the Victorian Parliament began public hearings One of the suggestions tabled at the Victorian Parliament in March 2004 was that the legal loophole be eliminated so that DNA samples could be taken from people like Percy. The Attorney-General, Rob Holes, said it would consider making this change. However, as of February 2005, the new legislation has still not been passed. On the 2nd of February 2005, detectives from Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales and the Australian Federal Police applied for permission to interview Percy again over the disappearance of 7-year-old Linda Stillwell. In a secret hearing at Melbourne Magistrates Court, permission was granted. New information possessed by police was Percy's own admission that he'd been in St Kilda on the day that Linda Stillwell vanished. Percy was removed from Ararat Prison to the Victorian Police Homicide Office in St Kilda Road to be questioned about the Stillwell case and the other cases for which he was a suspect. He was questioned for 9 hours, but said that he couldn't remember anything. He made no admissions. He was then driven to the City Wash House before being returned to Ararat Prison the next day. In 2011, Linda Stillwell's mother, Jean Priest, sought a judicial review of the Victorian coroner's decision that Percy should not be compelled to give evidence at an inquest on Linda's disappearance, arguing the coroner erred in law by declining to require him to testify and by excluding several witness statements which she says point to a possible connection between Percy and her daughter's disappearance. But the Court of Appeal President, Chris Maxwell, and Justices David Harper and Emilio Kiru rejected the request. The Supreme Court then ordered Miss Priest, 72, to pay Percy's $32,247 legal bill. The grieving grandmother, who had no idea how she would pay the bill, felt she just could not give up and planned one last bid for justice before the Court of Appeal. But she may have faced a total legal bill from Percy of $80,000 if that appeal failed. But before the review could begin, Derek Percy was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and given only weeks to live. Coroner Ian West and Detective Wayne Newman held a bedside interview with Percy at St Vincent's Hospital. While he again admitted to being in St Kilda at the time of Linda's disappearance, he repeated that he had no knowledge of killing her. Detective Newman continued to visit Percy daily in the hope that in his final days he would confess. But Percy died a month later on July 24, 2013, taking his secrets with him. A coroner's inquest went ahead the following year in 2014, and Deputy State Coroner Ian West ruled that the evidence provided proved that Derek Ernest Percy was responsible for the death of Linda Stillwell. Outside court, Linda's mother Jean and brother Gary Stillwell hugged. Linda's mother said the findings brought some closure, but she will never know where the remains of her little girl's body are located. After studying the case for over 11 years and having had many conversations with Percy himself, Detective Senior Sergeant Wayne Newman says that apart from the murder of Yvonne Touhy, to which Percy confessed, he believes that Percy was responsible for the murder of Linda Stillwell, that it was highly likely that he was responsible for the murders of Christine Sharrock and Marion Schmidt at Wanda Beach, and was probably responsible for the murders of Simon Brook and Alan Redston. He said in his opinion, while it is very possible that Percy could have been involved in the abduction and murder of the 3 Beaumont children, and the fact that he was in Glenelg at the time, the evidence in that case is tenuous at best. Let's finish this story with memories of the innocent children who never came home.
Another December, another snow. This time last year, we didn't know a light unfading could fade so soon.